House Party had a lot of character to it. Live and Large had character too, but it was a bit kind of not themed and or fanciful stuff. Like when we made Servo, my baby, actually I think they were all my babies, but when we had Servo, it was something that I could flesh out using a regular sim, and we could build the body around it, but it wasn't specifically for a theme. You know, the sad clown, Sunny, it wasn't necessarily something that fit somewhere. It was just a way to make chaos come to this space. It was absurdity. When we got into things like the genie, also, there was no real Arabian Nights theme. There was no Scheherazade. There was no themed space for it. In House Party, things were a little less wacky. We had people telling stories around a campfire, and thus you might get a ghost appearing. So we have Greenbeard. We needed people to be able to dress up for the parties. We were making different clothing for the NPCs. Sometimes you could wear it, sometimes you didn't. We didn't have a way for people to come to a lot and put on clothing, so that is why we have the equivalent of the armoire that could be dropped somewhere and opened up. Thus we have the costume trunk, and it was really well put together, especially things like the toga party costumes, like all the different pieces of clothing that you could have for the different theme. It lent just that much more texture, even though it wasn't a theme represented in the larger context. It still enlivened things, so that when you had the punch fountain, or you had the buffet table out and it was being tended by the chef, it definitely felt like you were adding that extra so that your guests could keep themselves fed. And this is a sketch I did, a color sketch I did, just to try and get the feeling down properly, like the mime and the DJ character. When it came down to it, it's not a one-to-one, but then again, you know, when you're looking for something to be odd and crazy, you can get some of the way there and taper it back so that you don't offend people. I heard people were offended by these pants, and that's fine. They can feel offended by them. The thing about The Sims at this particular point, we were not dealing with people coming to the game in order to have a normal experience. There's never been a time where stuff associated with Will Wright isn't wacky for one reason or another. Gabby was animated by Kevin Byall. He did a really great job of all the characters we've had. His mime, especially for House Party, was the most well received, especially because it was dark. It was not a lighthearted thing. When people see some of the things he's doing, like committing ritual suicide Japanese style or hanging himself, it is things that were regular pantomimes that you could see in stand-up comedy or different kinds of pantomime being done. The idea being, we're not trying to trivialize those activities, but there are some ways that you could show how much they dislike the things going on around them. Then we move on to something that's people's either loved or hated thing about this expansion pack. In the 90s and into the 2000s, along with sort of the resurgence of swing dancing and swing music and jazz, jump blues, rockabilly, which had been slowly but surely picking up, you know, vintage stuff, came burlesque. And it's another thing that is a fact of life, that people will try and express some level of playful sensuality out in the world and or be drawn to it. And in fact, you can look down here, it says you may want to send the kids out of the room. Yes, This is something that you would see in different forms of situation comedy and movies, etc. In fact, there was a famous scene in the Addams Family second movie with Raul Julia and Christopher Lloyd and Angelica Houston, where they have the bachelor party for Fester, and Lurch bakes the cake with the dancer in it because it is just that warped and crazy. We were not going to do anything of the sort to any of the Sims, although we have them regularly emulated when they don't have the skill to use the kitchen, which is just strange to me. This one seemed like not a problem. And it says here literally, originally only seen over the hill executives, emotionally impaired frat boys. Initially, I did a whole series of designs. This was not my favorite, but it was the one that was chosen because it was the most, I think, nostalgic, in that it kind of looks like what if Jeanette MacDonald from musicals of the 30s were playing a saloon performer. They called her Bunny, and that's fine, etc. When I did the original design, I was kind of hoping to get more of a coverage on the boot tray, a little bit more mass back there, just to, you know, show more ruffle. But this set of dancing is not unheard of in a burlesque context, and since we were making things for adult supervision, it just seemed like it wasn't too terrible. This guy, Chip, is kind of a riff on the Patrick Swayze Chippendales dancer. So, you know, the bow tie, there's no little vest, but we do have the tight, shiny pants to go with it. A little bit more pugilistic in the dancing style. All right, this is the setup that I put together for the character design of the lady dancer. So initially, you can see over here, put together a blank. There was also a blank for the rear view, but this is a more interesting sort of blank. Now you see that there's nothing scandalous going on here. It's just the general form like a mannequin. And what I was doing was having a bunch of different styles of burlesque and I guess you would say more classic 1950s stripper, the kind of things you would see in a like mafia film or a thing about Vegas showgirls. You know, right off the bat, you can see that generally what we have in Bunny is a combination of these two. So we have the skirt from here and some at the top and the hairstyle from the second. You can see I did this initially so that this looked more like a waitress in a very scant outfit, but with full hosiery and closed heels. And this had more of that Victorian button shoe going on. So this was a take on that Poppins woman. And then when you move over into this space, we're getting more of the sort of Betty Page glamour model. And then this is more like an Esther Williams kind of a swim costume. Then we get down here, we get more into classic 1950s stripper wear. So these would be satin. And then you get over to here and you get more into, I guess what you would say was the 1960s paranormal female genie from a certain TV show. And then definitely moving over into more of a science fiction-y. I tried to model this a little bit on Sting's character from the original Dune movie, the David Lynch Dune movie. And then up top, there's a lot of recasting and redirecting of the art in the Dune movies, but there's a recurring theme that the Emperor and different peoples have this bright red hair. So I was doing some fun stuff with that over here. Let me put me back here. Whee! And so we look over here, and we get to this next section, more of a mermaid kind of swim suit, bikini. This is more of a kind of lingerie set that I put together that's a little bit more scant. Likewise, I wanted something over here in the brunette with the updo to be more like a sort of an Audrey Hepburn kind of feeling, and then back to another Betty Page rockabilly Betty. So we had two of those, and then we had, you know, aqua. And when you're an art director or functioning as an art director, character designer, you want to give people stuff to choose, and you don't want to give them any chaff. So I was happy with all of these. I had more, but these were all put together on a regular piece of printer paper, printed out, and I was able to just draw it with a finer detail and then scan these so that when we wanted to see them, we could put them all on one larger piece of plotter paper, and then also make it so that we had these to pull off, you know, as doing what is called a buy, where people who are making the decisions will just say, okay, let me, I think these are the top three or whatever else, let's vote on it. And so you do. And in this case, it was these two, the saloon, roaring 20s, gay 90s, gold rush kind of costume, and the Edwardian magical maid costume that got amalgamated by Eric Chin at the behest of the producers. Seriously, I would have been happy with most of these. So when we get to Bunny, this was another, when I say it was my baby, it was my baby. I did the animation for it. I built the template for the cake itself. You can tell that the top of the cake turns off because it's a separate sprite, and then it turns into an accessory on the right hand. And we made these things so that it was very simple, because we knew that this would be playing in a party, so there would be sometimes dozens of other Sims around. So we made the animations very simple, very straightforward. The fun part is she's comes into existence tucked up in the fetal position and then rises up out of this and steps down, whereas the males jump athletically down to the floor. We wanted to show through the motion on the way down that they were athletic and dainty, that they had grace, etc. And this kind of stuff is a very tame version of what you might see at a strip club or a dance, like a sensual dance recital. We live in a world where there are people going to pole dance places for fitness, but also there are probably hundreds of thousands of people who know how to dance on poles in the world, if not millions. So it's not strange, it's not unusual to be loved by anyone. All right, and we're going back to Chip. This came about the Patrick Swayze, Chris Farley, Chippendales thing. I wanted to make sure that when it came out, there was plenty of feeling of them being a regular gym goer muscle man. He jumps down and he starts doing the pumping. It's a little bit like the Kana aerobics dance, but also that it feels like they're doing karate and they're doing hip thrusts and just lampooning what you might see in a Chippendales review or any other, you know, Las Vegas male review that people go to for their bachelorette parties. Part of this was we needed that level of mayhem, so we wanted to talk about making things, making individual costumes and characters to go along with that cake that are a bit unusual. So in this case, it was kind of like a long-haired Sean Connery and a construction worker sort of fantasy stripogram kind of feeling. When you move past that, we got into the other whimsical stuff. My original design was that just Sonny would be the clown, and we wouldn't necessarily have an Elvis impersonator. But I had worked at bars and nightclubs, and we thought maybe have a pompadour-y Elvis person. In this case, we didn't necessarily try to make Elvis, although I was well acquainted with the song stylings and entertainment sort of superpower that is Elvis, the Mexican Elvis. This is my Caribbean red, white, and blue flag boxer set to go on the clown, and then Elvis as well. Elvis, as we call him. I'm not responsible. But this was also Jeannie or Jane, the gorilla, because a bunch of us were, and still are, Gen X-y people who got to see a lot of bad movies on television, or maybe not necessarily bad, but unhinged films on television, like French sex comedies and Peter Sellers movies like Shot in the Dark, where there are literally, I think, a half dozen people in ape suits running around, driving little cars. That was the original. Shot in the Dark was the original Clouseau comedy. But there was a thing in the French and then eventually the English comedy world where you put a woman in a bikini in an ape suit, and no one would suspect that it's actually a young woman. They'd think it's just some weirdo wearing an ape suit. So here's Mr. Viz. Definitely wanted to make him look like a retired teddy boy or rockabilly dude, kind of like Elvis was, much like in movies like Bubba Hotep, was living a life unencumbered by his fame and fortune out in the world, but then he had to use his superlative gifts to earn a living as a stripogram dancer. So in any case, we don't really have to change the animation on the dude because of the size of the arms and the things he's doing. It just comes out as silly because he is doing these activities that you would not expect on somebody of that slight build. You know, Drew Carey is watching, or actually he's just wanting to talk to other guests. He isn't actually paying attention to Mr. Viz over here, which is kind of sad. But even doing the whole flexing thing is just a bit silly. But he does get down, you know? He does get it going on. You say, now nobody likes him, which is sad because he is a master of his craft. He does have his skills. But it's not as interesting as, you know, the other dancers. Especially when you have someone who's a bit slighter doing things that you'd expect on a more muscular person, or a clown. You know, when Sunny, actually here, let's just go on to Jane instead. Making sure that she comes out and you know that she is using the same animation as Bunny the dancer is silly and fun, because you want, much like Claire the Bear or other characters, to have a stereotypical gender associated, because it just makes it that much more characters. We've talked a little bit about the DJ, but she is definitely more part directly of that theme the DJ booth is in. I'm going to talk right now about this design I made. Let me move my head. This is what you would call a nudie suit. There is a gentleman named Nudie Cone who worked in Hollywood for decades making really beautiful embroidered clothing for Western and country Western and, you know, folksy people who were going to be performing at the Grand Ole Opry and on television, like Porter Wagner, Johnny Cash, Merle Haggard. In the 1990s 90s, early 1990s, I ended up hanging out with my friend Mark, who worked at Pixar, and then he had friends from high school, one named Rob and his then soon-to-be wife Heidi, who were the people who got married at Sam's Town. And they had a acquaintance who stayed at their house named Kim. Kim is one of the ladies of rockabilly. She's from LA. She's a beautiful woman, great voice, bright red hair. Oh, here's Mr. Cone here, Nudie Cone. He's called Nudie because it's a abstraction of his Russian name. And Mr. Cone set up business after living in New York, and that's where a lot of prop houses and costume houses are for the studios in Burbank, Hollywood, North Hollywood, and even delivering to places like out in Culver City or on the west side for, you know, the Paramount, CBS, Sony spaces. Right. Oh, there's Miss Lenz. She is wonderful if you like rockabilly music. She's got a powerful voice and just a good presence. She's on par with Brenda Lee, who you'll see up here rocking around the Christmas tree, was her most famous single. She also did one called Sweet Nothings, which was pretty cool. This is Janice Martin, who is considered the Lady Elvis. Rosie Flores, who was actually on the marquee of Gillies from the object section for, you know, object and theme section. Most famous rockabilly lady of all time, Wanda Jackson. Now, I worked at a place called the DNA Lounge in San Francisco back in the early 90s, before I actually had my career take off. I used to stand right over here, where the front door used to. The front door here is now over on the screen left side, but I used to stand over here on the right side, and we had the line going either this way or that way, or both, and stanchions, and I used to stand here in a leather jacket and check IDs. And one time, checking IDs there, Chris Isaak was performing. See, there he is. That's the actual show where he performed in September of 1990. When I got to work, he was standing outside wearing I think a bomber jacket, not his typical clothing of the time, which looked more like one of these things. But if you look earlier on here, when he performed his band Silvertone, usually wore something black and with little beautiful thread, you know, silver thread on it. So he was right out here, right after sound check, checking IDs with the doorman. And this is something he would do on a regular basis. And he would have people come up, and he would wear a baseball cap or sunglasses, and none of the people coming to see him, unless they already knew him well, as a friend or something, would actually recognize him while he was checking IDs. So that's the DNA Lounge. Before it was the DNA Lounge in the 80s. DNA came around in the mid 80s. Earlier than that, it was a leather bar called Chaps. There you go, 11th at Harrison. During the Levi's and leather vest and Chaps era of the what they call the clone era, where people would go out looking for the person. They would dress up looking like the person they wanted to be with. They wanted to meet and, date, etc. So anyway, you can tell this is the normal set list from that era for Mr. Isaak. He's a great guy. At that particular point, he had just started taking off, so you can see in his set list for that tour in 1990, Wicked Game was in there. Blue Hotel. Then he would also play different jazzy, bluesy kind of stuff, and just a lot of fun. It was he did a great show, and in any case, he was wearing a nudie costume, very similar to that. Likewise, you can see his fun there. The best part about this is that it sets up the idea of, women's skirt suits. So when I came up with this thing, it was because I'd seen all these powerful women with guitars. We We have a few of them in San Francisco, like Carmen Get It, who is with Steve Lucky and the Rumba Bums. Normally she doesn't look too Western. She looks more like Kim does here, where it's like very much a affectation of the late 40s into the 50s with the crinolines and just, you know, fairly proper summer kind of dress. Love the bangs. Always have loved the bangs. You know, these women who howl and scream and just make really good music. So it was a lot of fun to come up with this one and to design that costume, because it's something I thought was fairly iconic. When you grow up in California and you're surrounded by people who came here, and then the older ones came during either World War II or before that, even in the Dust Bowl era. I grew up in a space where some of these people were from Arkansas and Oklahoma, Okies and Arkies as they called them, and they kept the music. They were, you know, country music people. They drove pickup trucks. They did go to Western and country themed bars. They listened to that country music. This actually, for some people, is considered wedding attire. So I know people who have gotten married in such things, especially rockabilly people, you know, because that there, you can tell, is notched, so it's a suit, but they make these things as tuxedos as well, either embroidered or with these tape hems. Like you can see that it's just amazing level of embroidery, almost like a suit of lights for a mariachi or a matador. So look at this stuff with the fringe and the embroidery and the pictures of different cowboy motifs. You know, you've got things like eagles and saddles. So it's quite interesting to do this kind of thing. And also know that all these people, you know, this Western stuff is not unknown in California where I grew up, and it is just another facet of stuff that happens around us. When we were kids, and it was in the 80s, and we were hearing stuff coming out of London, like Brian Setzer, and like the Stray Cats, and we did have those people here, but you know, Dave and Alvin from X and all these people who were playing more like roots rock and roll, country western, or even going to places where people were doing the equivalent of a barn dance. People were two-stepping and even doing West Coast swing to Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys, which is like, I'll admit, is a favorite of mine, just because it is this happy violin and, you know, it's not bluegrass, you know, it's definitely has a Western feeling to it. Even to the point where some of it sounds like music you would hear from their ancestors in like Ireland, or, you know, the West Country in England, Cornwall, and even Wales, rollicking fiddle and mandolin and guitar and hand drums like the baron. Just, yeah, it can be a happy kind of thing. The NPCs he put together and some of the costumes for the toga, like the toga stuff, the Western stuff, the aloha wear, it expanded what the content creators could make and would show these different silhouettes that were more than just a problem we had later, which was we kept making similar things like that were just fairly fashionable but had the same silhouette. Definitely the heft of some of the clothing was really important to fill in the expansion packs with, so that, I mean, people are still now making clothing for The Sims 1 and exploring that, and then repeating some of the stuff we made in The Sims 1 in The Sims, you know, Sims 2, Sims 3, but now especially The Sims 4 space. So you know, I'm glad I was able to help with this kind of stuff, to make the really strange hand puppets that go with this thing, the fighting hand puppets that make up these different wacky things. But it was my honor and my pleasure to actually just be able to sit down and draw this stuff and make the templates, you know, for the dances, make the templates for the different things we're going to develop. I mean, this was a pleasure to do. I love doing character design. It's part of my current project that I do have, most of the main characters are middle-aged women, but they're, they're powerful women. They're women who, have a sensual makeup to their deep, look into my eyes, look into my haunted eyes, deep depth to character and internal lives, and I don't think people would want it any other way, unless they're just kind of weird and not in a good way. So mimes and clowns and boxing gloves and just anyway. Woo! I hope you have a beautiful day, and I doff my captain's hat at you, and I hope you enjoy this video. If you have any comments or suggestions for me for future videos regarding different subjects, deep dives on some of this stuff, I have a lot of information about this kind of thing because we were in the thick of it, spending a lot of time making these things happen. We had a bulletin board system. We had feedback coming from customers at the time. Please, if you're inclined, or even if you're not, like the video and maybe subscribe to the channel. I'll be putting out more stuff more regularly. Currently it is the 3rd of July 2026, so this is the 3rd house party video. There will be more. This one in particular was done as it was because I did a poll and people said they wanted an overview with anecdotes, and I do have anecdotes, so I hope people like this. Like I said, like, subscribe. I have a Discord for people who want to get in touch with me, or people who do similar stuff, for resources, especially if you want to make content that goes along with this stuff. And I've been blessed in that I've got to meet a lot of these people I talk about, and I grew up in a space where meeting up with people who sing and do really cool stuff like these folks, or let's see, or that dude, were just something that happened the same way that when I moved to LA, I didn't intend to go work at Disney feature, but because of people I knew and because the people had a need, I went and I did that. Likewise, I worked again on the Toontown thing because I knew a person who needed a person to fix things, and I'm a fixer. I do that. I design, but I'm versatile. I'm a good generalist who also has a really good design eye, on top of the INFJ, autism, ADHD stuff that I deal with. So have a beautiful day, have a beautiful week, have a beautiful life, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye. Oh yeah, I'm on Patreon too. Just look for irkinterAction or irk and you'll probably find me. Bye.